Okay, I figured just doing a recording would probably make this easier. So right now, I have this basically working. Yeah, okay, so I have that going. I just moved the player over here so that, I don't have to keep jumping over this thing. Alright, so do I still have this open? No, I don't. Let's open up one of these things. Here's kind of what I was talking about. You have like Goblin. You've got this on trigger enter destroy game object. So this is going to destroy the game object when anybody enters the Goblin's range, or like collides with the Goblin. Same with the Orc. Same with the Troll. So like what I'm seeing here. In fact, I'm seeing this with all of these guys. I'm just kind of seeing the same code over and over, right? Red, magenta, black for death warning. Red, magenta. Yeah, these are basically the same. Here's the other thing that I don't understand. Enemies find game objects with tag orc 0. Are you just trying to change the color on this orc? If you're just trying to change the color on this orc, like you are an orc, so you should just be able to do, well, let's do troll, because I see the troll changing. Right, you don't need to like find the game object. You are the game object. So you should just be able to say material dot color troll rends. So it's probably game object if it's a game. That doesn't make sense though. Really? Game object dot color? No. What actually is this? Troll, find object with tag troll. This should be an array of enemies. Troll rends, renderer. Oh, you don't actually do anything with enemies. You just do something with renderers. Yeah, you're not actually using this variable at all. Enemies. This is of type enemies. Enemy. Huh. So what's this? Oh, it is. You have some array of enemies. Well, okay. I'm not going to screw with that then. But the idea is that you have all of these kind of already here. Right? So I don't think you really need any of this. I don't think you need these objects at all, because they're not doing anything special. But let's talk about the actual thing that we're trying to do. So, there's like the bounce that we're trying to do here. So I might actually make a new thing. Create C# script. And I'd say like, player bounce or something. I don't know. This is sort of a terrible name. What did you expect there? Oh! That's so stupid. Alright. I added the .cs. Let's try this again. Create C# script. Player bounce. There we go. Now I'm not getting that weird error. Okay. So what I do here is, if we go to the player, oops, not you. Where is it? Platform, falling platform? No. Platform movement, this guy. So if we go here, it's basically these things if other is tag. So I would just sort of take one of these guys. Well, one of these guys. And use this. Where's my bounce? There we go. If other is player, let's double check and make sure that the player is tagged. Player is untagged. You'd have to tag this player. So that might be part of why it wasn't working. So oh, whoops, I screwed this up. Void on. We want actually this whole thing. Whoops. I just have to recopy this function. Oops. Okay. So, here we go. Rig.add4. So this is actually on the player. So other dot. So what I'd actually want to do is I'd want to say, you know, rigid body. Okay, it knows what that is. Rigid body equals, or I could say player rigid body or whatever I want. This is also player. Equals other in this case being the player, dot game object, dot get component, rigid body. Yes, yes. If rigid body not equal to null. I can't type today. Then we do this thing. The player's going to have a rigid body. This is sort of an extra test that we need to do. It's not a huge deal. Then we want rigid body dot add force. Bounce height. Okay, we don't have bounce height. Well, that's easy enough, right? Public. I'm assuming it's a float. I know, cat. Bounce height equals... and you had it set to sort of this like 5 default thing. Dot 0f to make it a float. Yes, I know. It's her feeding time, so that's why she's complaining. And that should be right. So anything that has this script on it will cause the player to bounce. That's the idea. So we have, this may just be extra stuff, it doesn't matter, because we know the player has one. In the real world, I would assert for that and all that. But if other.gameObject.tag is equal to player, we've double checked, here's the player I've clicked on, has the player tag, which it didn't before. Then we grab the rigid body for the player, for whatever we just collided with, and we say, okay, that rigid body, you know, for our other character, for the thing we collided with, you know, dot add force, transform, dot add whatever. And then this bounce height, I just put it here. You know, nothing too crazy. So that's all I really did in this particular instance. So now all that's left to do, well, I have to go back and remove all this stuff, right? So that's all you're doing. So I'm just going to kill this whole function. Should be it. Now I have to go to the troll, and I say add component. And like player bounce or whatever it was. Yep, player bounce. So I add this here. What do we want to tune it to? I think I found around 500 to be at least obvious what it's doing. And if I press play, and I have to jump kind of high, boink. Oh, 500 is maybe too much. That feels like too much, but you see what's, you know, you see the idea. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. That's all you really need to do. Now this script can be added to anything that needs to bounce, and it can have unique tuning. So this is a goblin or something, right? No, that's health. This is maybe the goblin. Yeah, that's the goblin. So I can add it to this guy too. I can say player bounce, and I can say, well, you know, instead of bouncing at 500, maybe you bounce at 100 or something. Like I can tune it per instance, which is what's really nice. If I didn't want to do that, I could actually do it with the player as well. There's other ways to make that work. I don't know how much you've gone into any of this stuff, but another option is I could have said public, and this probably comes later, you know, bounce, you know, bounce or something like that, with nothing in here. And I would write this function in here. You've already got a thing that you call rig, so rig. Like you could do something like this, and then in this case the player, it's still tuned on the player, and then from here we would actually say we'd do something similar. We'd say oh, what's the name of this guy again? Platform movement player equals other dot game object dot get component platform movement. Then we'd say player dot, and then any public function is accessible, so we could say bounce. And we do something like this. So that, you know, there's multiple options for how you want to do this. This is nice because it puts all of the functionality on the player, and all we have to do is that the player can do whatever they want in regards to a bounce. This version is simpler. I think the top one that I have here is maybe simpler because we're just directly modifying the rigid body. Whatever. Either one is fine. there's other models of this as well. Like, it's actually valid. We could actually say something like, and I'm just, this is like kind of advanced stuff here. But we could just, no matter what, every time this guy collides with anyone, we try and grab this platform movement. And then we say if player is not equal to null, meaning do we have this component, then bounce. This is another way of doing it. What this says is we don't care about the tag. We say anyone who has this component gets this functionality, basically. Like, we do this thing. This is another way of doing it, right? So there's a bunch of different ways to make this work. And that's the fancy thing with programming, scripting, all that kind of stuff. You should do what your instructor says because they have a plan of moving forward. But I wanted to show you kind of a few different ways to make this work. And these are all pretty valid. If it were me, I would probably do this method. I would probably tag based on the player. And there's actually a faster way to do this if I remember right. Yeah, see, it's giving me a warning. This is new, so use compare tag. There we go. This is the more preferred way to do it. This other.gameObject.compare tag. It's fairly new, so like a lot of the course content hasn't really been updated. I'm not even sure that everybody knows about it. I didn't know about it until I started like hovering over these things. But yeah, so I have to kill this. So if it were me as a first pass, I would probably be doing this. Something to this effect, where I'd have this guy and I would do like grab the player movement and call some bounce function. This is probably what I would do. But I've done this in the past, and this is perfectly valid. This is really convenient because in this case you have to do two things. You have to grab the player movement. To be a valid player, it has to have both a player movement and be tagged as player. We saw how easy it was to forget to do that. This way, I'm just like, hey, if you have this component, you're good. The disadvantage is that now anyone who has this player movement is going to have this functionality. So you could split that up into another component. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways. There's so many ways to do things, or are as many ways to do things as there are programmers. So whatever makes sense, and however you want to do it. The other thing, this is going to go against the module, and I don't want you to go against the module. I want to just have you look at something that is thinking about this. The module is trying to teach you a very specific thing. But one thing to consider is you have this enemy, which has these virtual functions, this attack warning, and so on. The question is, do we actually need these? Because these are all doing exactly the same thing right now, mostly, right? So this is maybe not like this. So the reason why the module is doing this is because the reality is you would probably have like attack or whatever. Like attack would be just so completely different for goblins and orcs. Right now they're just loading a scene. But they're so completely different for goblins and orcs or whatever typically because they have different animations that they're running that the virtual function method that they're using here is totally valid. But it gives me a nice little thing to show to say like, hey, if you do see code where it's basically exactly the same, think about if there's a way that you can extract that somehow. As an example, I'm not convinced, like maybe attack warning or safe warning are going to be different for everyone, but if they're not different for everyone, that could live in the base class. That's not uncommon, where that code could live here, and then you can override it if you want. This is all stuff that, you can go through in the module, or, this is all stuff that is covered in like more advanced kind of things. But it's worth thinking about that. A lot of what we're trying to do is we're trying to decouple things, hide things from each other. Because as soon as, basically the issue is what you saw here. Not here. Where it's like, oh, every enemy, now I have to change like imagine working on a game that has millions of lines of code, thousands of source files. If you're going to add a new enemy type, you want to create a new orc or goblin, you're like a troll. Well, okay, cool. We want to have a bugbear or a kobold or whatever. Well, what you'd think you'd have to do is, and what you should have to do is create a new class here that's like the kobold class. You inherit from enemy. And you can just look at enemy and be like, okay, here's my virtual functions. I'm probably going to want to override how kobolds attack, how they do these warnings, whatever. Like these virtual functions are going to be overridden. However, in your system, that's not the case. You need to override those things and then also just somehow mystically know to go here and add another if statement. So that's why I much prefer this kind of model, where you're just attaching some new thing here so that you can say, well, I can add this new thing. Now, here's the other thing. This player bounce, as I kind of look at your architecture more, I might not even do this. I might do it on enemy. Because that's the nice thing about having these base classes. If every enemy has this, I might consider doing it here. Sort of depends on how enemies work, but you know, that's another possibility. But anyway, my point being that like this kind of model makes it a little easier for us to be able to say, well, if we want the player to bounce, we just add the thing and we're done, and we don't have to worry about it. So as you're adding new enemies, all you really have to do is sort of copy it. And you can have a prefab or something similar that you're copying different, you know, goblins and stuff from. That's often, in most games, you're not going to just throw enemies out here and start adding stuff to them. You'll have prefabs and things. I don't know if you guys have gotten into prefabs. I feel like you like briefly touched on them in some of the earlier classes. So I'm not 100% sure if you guys have really dug into a lot of prefab stuff. But once you get into prefabs, you know, you can start doing some really cool things. Because then all these guys just become prefabs, and you're just instantiating prefabs. And so making one change can affect all the goblins, all the trolls, and so on. And you can start setting things up, like this guy has a collision box, this guy has a collision box. I've made mine very tall. But like that feels like a more reasonable collision box. Yeah, that feels pretty good. It's a little bit under his head, which is what I would expect. It also means that you're favoring the player. So if I'm sailing up like this and I just barely clip his corner, you're going to give it to the player, which is good. You generally want to give the player, in cases where there's a tie or you're not really sure, you know, if the player's not really sure whether or not they should have hit the enemy, probably they should have hit the enemy. Or the player's going to think it's unfair. Anyway, I don't know. This was a little bit of a whirlwind of different things. I hope it wasn't too crazy. I want, the whole goal of this, one was to show you like what I was talking about in terms of this player bouncing, how to make this work. But I wanted to show you just like a little bit behind the looking glass. I don't expect you to like fully understand how all this works, but a little bit behind the looking glass, or through the looking glass of, you know, once you get deep into this stuff, it changes the way you think about things. And so you start noticing like, well, this is a lot of copy and paste. Can we change this? It's very similar to what Goblin's doing. Or, you know, start thinking about like, oh right, if I have 100 of these, you know, I'm gonna have to make a bunch of these changes. That's not cool. Can we reverse it? You know, put it on the enemy, so that now the enemy's responsible. It's much more reasonable to say, I'm going to add a new enemy type, I need to make sure to add the right components and everything, than it is to say, I'm adding a new enemy type, oh, I better go change the player. So that's, you know, it's thinking about that kind of stuff. Okay, hopefully that helped. Hopefully this was a useful little video. Let me know if you have any questions, and that's it.